So many of us joined this industry because we knew we could make a big difference to the patient. All right? Quick show of hands. Who loves the fact that the patient is at the centre of what we do? Who loves it? You'll see suppliers, paramedics, administrators, everyone has their hand up. It's a beautiful thing. But one of the trends we saw emerge in that pursuit of the patient was paramedics becoming patients through work health and safety issues. We all saw it, didn't we? We really started to pay attention to this probably about, well, everyone's been paying attention to it. We started investing in solving it maybe 5 years ago in Australia. But step up, globally, this is an issue. It's an issue. This isn't something that's unique to Australia. You know, the paramedic being the hero that is fearless and puts the patient first is a beautiful thing. It's something that makes us great as an industry. But it's a watch out. And one of the trends Stryker has seen globally has been leaders stepping up and saying, you know what, hang on a sec. We need to step back here and we need to think about the safety of our workplace. And so we saw a big rollout of powered stretchers. Right? So powered stretchers have gone just so well in Australia and New Zealand. Probably New Zealand's coming, but in Australia they're everywhere. I go to meetings in Australia and paramedics literally come up to me and hug me. And it's really awkward because I'm like, I didn't make the stretcher. We just brought it over here and it's really uncomfortable. But they hug me. And it's those moments where you get to love being part of what you do. But the reality is there's still a lot of workplace risk in this space. I think there always will be. You know, it's the nature of what happens for paramedicine. But one of the trends we're seeing is probably going to increase that risk. And I want to call that out today. We're seeing globally that the research into ECMO as a viable treatment for refractory VF is becoming incredibly clear. If we can get a patient that has refractory VF to hospital within a certain time period, survival is incredibly good. Remember, this patient cohort is surviving at 2% at the moment. You leave them at scene, it's 2%. What's that got to do with work health and safety? What it's got to do with work health and safety is you're going to be transporting more patients in the middle of a cardiac arrest. Now, I don't need to paint the picture too deeply, but transporting a patient in the middle of cardiac arrest is a workplace practice currently in this industry that mirrors things that used to happen in the 60s and 70s in other industries. Imagine a trucking company allowing its driver to get up, take a seatbelt off in the middle of while the truck's driving along and move around the cabin. I can promise you it's a sackable offence. But the beauty of paramedics is you're so committed to the patient. No one complains. It's a beautiful thing. I'm not having a go. I'm not having a go. Like, I'm in awe of what you do. And I think there's a role that industry plays, not just Stryker. I'm not saying that this is a Stryker solution. There's actually a lot of industry solutions for this kind of thing. But what I'm calling out is the ECMO studies are there. You can go and look them up yourself. They're there. There's more coming out soon. There was some done in Victoria recently. You know, people threw stones at them and tried to say criteria. It's proving out. If we transport patients in VF, we can save them. To do that, we have two choices. Paramedics take more risk, or we face up to the fact that we've probably got to change the way transport is done. We probably need to learn from other industries about what's safe in terms of what happens in a moving vehicle. Okay, so that's one big trend. We've seen the big investment in powered stretchers across the world. We've seen drops in workplace injuries. I don't want to look at any of the CEOs, but the data that we're waiting for people to publish, and we don't know who's going to publish first. SAS will probably be first, we think. The data is showing this is going to be subject to what's printed, okay? This is just me speaking from what people are telling us. 70 to 80% reductions in the most common workplace injury for paramedics. 70 to 80%. It's an incredible reduction. And so there's a clear leadership in paramedicine has said, you know what, paramedic safety is important. We've seen New South Wales invest in the psychological care of paramedics, and it's part of this big trend that's happening. The patient is the centre. People aren't moving away from that. But there's this statement going on, not just in Australia, but globally, that says the paramedic can't become the patient just because you're so committed to the patient. And industry has a role to improve that. Now, we've seen this trend play out, quite interestingly. We've seen the ECMO trend play out because the US and Australia are actually quite far behind in the ECMO fronts. Quite often, I think the Western world is probably a bit divorced from what's happening in Asia. You know, in Japan, they've had ECMO programs up for years. In Asia, you'd be interested to note, we ship more mechanical devices in Asia, excluding China and Japan, the two biggest spots in Asia, in 1 month in January, than we have in the history of Australia. It's interesting. But yet, in Japan, there's hardly any powered stretchers. There's not even any workers' comp. A paramedic there that gets a back injury is told, it's your fault you didn't lift them right. So we've all got our OH&S issues. So no, this isn't, you know, Stryker has its OH&S issues. We all have this. But collectively, we're seeing a trend of leaders stepping up. And that's a beautiful thing because we've got to get behind what the paramedic does. So this trend of ECMO is definitely happening. The other big trend we're seeing globally, which I think is fairly fundamental to the way that we deliver emergency care, is more ambulance services are saying, you know what, stakeholder A, we cannot get to the patient quick enough. People are stuck in this window, depending on geography, of 8 to 12 minutes. It's this range of time to get to these critical patients. And you get this diminishing return. You get an extra 10, 50, 100 million, depending on the service, that gets another 30 seconds off the time. But increasingly, you will hear, and we will hear this going forward, this is a bit of a future trend, you're going to hear service leaders saying, you know what, we're trying to get from 8 minutes to 7 minutes 30. But the research is incredibly clear that we actually need to be there in 3 minutes. The research on public access defibrillation is some really great stuff out of Victoria. There's some wonderful research coming out of Europe. There's stuff that's come out of the UK a little bit ago. There's a lot in the US. There's this sweet spot around 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. If you go through the studies and do the work yourself, go and have a look at the studies. Don't listen to my numbers and take it as gospel. That's not what we should be as an industry. We should all look at the literature. But the literature, if you can find the studies that show the 3 minute window for cardiac arrest, you will see those ones that are showing survival if you can get the first shock out in 3 minutes, they're often around that 70% mark for VF patients. 70%. In peak hour Melbourne, in Perth, even in Adelaide these days, you can't get there in 3 minutes. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Now, what that means is high quality CPR has to happen from the bystander. You know, somehow it's not getting taught in schools. You know, all these things are happening. We all know that's a disgrace. Some schools do get it trained in. We saw Restart a Heart Day that David's been leading and the CAA's been leading. That's wonderful. But ultimately, we need defibrillators there earlier. You know, your ambulance just can't get there quick enough. So public access defibrillation globally is becoming a massive topic. The data's there. The ECMO data's there too for a smaller subset of patients, really high value patients. The data around public access defibrillation is clear. There's debates on what programs and how to run them and what app and things like that. There's debates there. But I don't think you're going to get a credible person saying that quicker access to AEDs in the majority of situations will save a ton of lives. Now, so what I'm trying to say is we've seen a big increase in paramedic safety. That's become a bigger priority. And that doesn't detract from the patient. The paramedic can't become the patient. We've seen a big increase in ECMO research. We've seen ECMO centres springing up all across the country in the hospital sector. There is going to be more patient transport in these really dangerous situations where your ambulance is driving along the road quickly, and we're going to have to be careful with that because no one needs to die trying to save a life. The next one, we're going to get services that get squeezed for an extra minute, extra 30 seconds. But the reality is, for cardiac arrest, we need that treatment to start straight away. And so the role we think is going to happen with the ambulance services, it's the most trusted profession in the country. Both countries. Everyone trusts the paramedic service. The influence that your services have and you as a paramedic have over change is immense. And so we need to be standing up and educating the public, just like the fireys did with smoke alarms. They already did this with smoke alarms. We've got to do it with defibrillation. And so we will be collaborating in that. I know our competitors will be collaborating in this. This isn't something that has to be us or them. It doesn't have to be you or us. It doesn't have to be government versus you. It needs to be all of us coming together to do it together to save lives. Thanks.